Sarah Martinez stood at the gates of Fort Jackson with her green duffel bag slung over her shoulder. The morning sun was just starting to rise and she could already feel sweat forming on her forehead. At 5 feet 2 inches tall, she was shorter than most people around her, but her dark eyes held a determination that many twice her size lacked. She had dreamed of this moment since she was a little girl, watching her grandfather polish his old army medals. He had served in Vietnam and always told her stories about honor duty and protecting others. Now at 22 years old, Sarah was finally following in his footsteps. The bus that brought her and 30 other new recruits to the base was already pulling away. Sarah looked around at the other young men and women who would be her companions for the next several months of basic training. Most of them looked nervous. Some were trying to act tough, while others looked like they wanted to run back home to their mothers. A tall drill sergeant with a voice like thunder appeared in front of the group. His name tag read Sergeant Williams, and his uniform was so perfectly pressed it looked like it had never been worn before. He began shouting instructions, and the new recruits scrambled to form lines. Sarah found herself standing next to a young man who looked barely 18 years old. His hands were shaking as he tried to hold his bag properly. Behind her stood another recruit who was so tall he blocked out the sun. This man had broad shoulders, thick arms, and the kind of build that came from years of playing football. She heard him whisper to someone beside him. His name was James Mitchell, and he was telling another recruit about how he had been the star player at his college before deciding to join the Army. His voice was loud and confident in a way that made Sarah pay attention. Something about his tone reminded her of the boys in high school, who thought being bigger meant being better. The group of 317 recruits was divided into smaller companies. Sarah found herself in Alpha Company with 79 other new soldiers. As they were marched to their barracks, she noticed that Mitchell had also been assigned to Alpha Company. He was walking near the back of the group, making jokes and comments that caused some of the other recruits to laugh nervously. Their first stop was the supply building, where each recruit received their uniforms, boots, and basic equipment. Sarah had to ask for extra small sizes in almost everything, but the staff sergeant helping her seemed impressed by how organized and polite she was. While waiting in line for medical processing, Sarah overheard Mitchell talking to a group of male recruits. He was complaining about how the military had changed too much and was letting people join who had no business being soldiers. His eyes kept drifting toward the female recruits as he spoke, and Sarah noticed that several of the women looked uncomfortable. During their first meal in the mess hall, Sarah sat with 2 other female recruits named Lisa and Jennifer. Lisa was from a small town in Ohio and had joined the Army to pay for college. Jennifer was older at 25 and had decided on a military career after working several dead-end jobs. Mitchell sat 3 tables away, but his voice carried across the room. He was telling stories about his football days and how he could bench press more than most people weighed. Every few minutes he would make a comment about how basic training was going to be easy for someone like him, but might be too tough for others. After dinner, the recruits were given their first briefing about what to expect during basic training. They would wake up at 5 in the morning every day. They would learn to march, shoot clean weapons, and work as a team. Most importantly, they would learn what it meant to be a soldier in the United States Army. That first night in the barracks, Sarah lay in her narrow bunk, listening to the sounds of 79 other people trying to fall asleep. Some were crying quietly. Others were snoring loudly. A few were whispering to each other about whether they had made the right decision. Sarah was not crying or having second thoughts. What she was doing was thinking about Mitchell and the way he looked at the female recruits. She had grown up with 3 older brothers who had taught her how to recognize different types of people. Mitchell reminded her of a boy named Rick from her high school who had caused trouble for many girls before someone finally stood up to him. What Mitchell did not know about Sarah was that she had been taking martial arts classes since she was 7 years old. Her parents had insisted on it after she came home from school one day with a bloody nose and torn clothes. A group of older kids had been picking on her because she was small, and they thought she would not fight back. Her martial arts instructor, Master Kim, had been patient with her in the beginning, when she could barely kick higher than her waist. But Sarah had natural talent, and more importantly, she had the kind of determination that could not be taught. By the time she graduated high school, she had earned her black belt in karate and had spent 2 additional years learning Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. The training had taught her more than just how to defend herself. It had taught her how to read people and situations. She could tell when someone was about to become aggressive just by watching their body language and listening to their tone of voice. She had learned to stay calm under pressure and to never let her emotions control her actions. As Sarah finally drifted off to sleep, she made a mental note to keep watching Mitchell. Something told her that their paths would cross again, and when they did, she wanted to be ready. She had not come this far to let some oversized bully ruin her dream of becoming a soldier. The next morning came quickly with Sergeant Williams banging on a metal trash can and shouting for everyone to get up and get moving. Sarah was already awake and dressed before most of the other recruits had even opened their eyes. Today would be their first real day of training, and she was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. As the recruits stumbled toward the mess hall for breakfast, Sarah noticed Mitchell pushing past some of the smaller male recruits to get to the front of the line. His behavior was subtle enough that the drill sergeants did not notice, but Sarah saw how the other recruits stepped aside to avoid confrontation. She made another mental note and continued walking. Fort Jackson was about to become very interesting. 3 weeks had passed since Sarah first arrived at Fort Jackson, and she was quickly proving herself to be one of the best recruits in Alpha Company. She could run faster than most of the men could march farther without complaining and shoot more accurately than soldiers twice her size. The drill sergeants had started using her as an example of what dedication and hard work could accomplish. But with her success came unwanted attention from James Mitchell. What had started as general complaints about women in the military had become personal attacks directed specifically at Sarah. Mitchell seemed to take her achievements as a personal insult to his own abilities. During morning physical training, Sarah would complete the obstacle course in record time. Mitchell would finish several minutes later, breathing heavily and making loud comments about how the course must have been made easier for certain people. He never said her name directly, but everyone knew who he was talking about. The other recruits had started to notice the tension between them. Lisa and Jennifer, who had become Sarah's closest friends in Alpha Company, often asked her why she did not report Mitchell's behavior to the drill sergeants. Sarah always gave the same answer. She could handle herself, and she did not want to be seen as someone who could not solve her own problems. What Sarah did not tell her friends was that she was actually studying Mitchell's behavior patterns. She watched how he moved when he was angry. She noticed that he always clenched his right fist before making aggressive gestures. She observed that he became most hostile when other people were watching, because he enjoyed having an audience. During weapons training, Sarah scored perfect marks on her rifle qualifications. She had grown up hunting with her father and grandfather, so handling firearms was natural to her. Mitchell barely passed his test and spent the rest of the day complaining that his rifle must have been damaged. That evening in the mess hall, Mitchell sat down at the table directly behind Sarah and her friends. He began talking loudly to his group about how some people got special treatment because of their gender. He said that in real combat situations, natural physical differences would show and people would see who the real soldiers were. Sarah continued, eating her dinner and talking quietly with Lisa and Jennifer. She had learned from Master Kim that bullies wanted reactions, and the best way to frustrate them was to remain calm and focused on your own goals. But Mitchell was not satisfied with being ignored. As Sarah stood up to clear her tray, he deliberately pushed his chair back into her path. She had to step around him to avoid collision, and he smirked at his friends as if he had accomplished something clever. The next day during combat training, exercises, Sarah was paired with a recruit named Tommy Wilson, who was struggling with the physical demands of basic training. Tommy was thin and had never played sports or done manual labor. The drill sergeants had paired him with Sarah because they knew she would help him improve rather than make fun of his weaknesses. Sarah spent extra time showing Tommy how to properly hold his rifle and how to move efficiently during tactical exercises. She was patient and encouraging, and Tommy began to show real improvement under her guidance. Mitchell watched these training sessions with growing anger. He had been paired with stronger recruits who did not need his help, and he felt like Sarah was getting attention for being helpful while he was being ignored. His resentment grew stronger each day. During a particularly challenging field exercise, Sarah and Tommy were working together to complete a mission that required teamwork and communication. They finished successfully, while several other teams, including Mitchell's team, failed to complete their objectives on time. Sergeant Williams praised Sarah and Tommy for their cooperation and used them as an example of how soldiers should support each other. Mitchell's face turned red as he listened to the praise, and Sarah noticed his hands forming fists at his sides. After the exercise, Mitchell approached Tommy while Sarah was talking to one of the drill sergeants. He stood very close to the smaller recruit and spoke in a low, threatening voice that only Tommy could hear. Tommy told Sarah later that Mitchell had warned him to stop making the other men look bad by accepting help from a girl. He said that if Tommy continued to train with Sarah, there would be consequences that Tommy would not like. Sarah felt her anger building for the first time since arriving at Fort Jackson. She had been willing to tolerate Mitchell's comments about her, but threatening other recruits crossed a line that she would not accept. That night, Sarah found Mitchell in the common area of the barracks, where most of Alpha Company was relaxing after a long day of training. She walked directly up to him and spoke in a voice that was quiet but firm enough for nearby recruits to hear. She told Mitchell that if he had problems with her performance or her presence in the Army, he should discuss those problems with her directly. She said that involving other recruits in his personal issues was the behavior of a coward, not a soldier. Mitchell stood up quickly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He was nearly a foot taller than Sarah and outweighed her by at least 80 pounds. Several recruits stopped their conversations to watch what was happening. Mitchell leaned down so his face was close to Sarah's and told her that she had made a big mistake talking to him that way. He said she obviously did not understand how things worked in the real world, and that someone needed to teach her some respect. Sarah did not step back or look away. She had faced down bullies before, and she knew that showing fear would only make the situation worse. She told Mitchell that respect was earned through actions, not through intimidation, and that so far his actions had earned him nothing but contempt from his fellow soldiers. The common area had gone completely silent. All 79 members of Alpha Company were watching the confrontation between the smallest female recruit and the largest male recruit. Everyone sensed that something significant was about to happen, but no one knew exactly what form it would take. Mitchell's face was now bright red, and his breathing had become heavy. Sarah remained perfectly calm, her dark eyes never leaving his face. She was ready for whatever came next. The confrontation in the common area ended without violence that night, but everyone in Alpha Company knew that something bigger was building between Sarah and Mitchell. The tension between them had become so obvious that even the drill sergeants had started watching their interactions more carefully. Over the next few days, Mitchell's behavior became increasingly aggressive. During formation, he would deliberately step on Sarah's heels when the company was marching. During inspections, he would bump into her hard enough to knock her slightly off balance. During meal times, he would make crude jokes about women in combat, while staring directly at her. Sarah continued to ignore his provocations, but her friends could see that she was reaching her limit. Lisa noticed that Sarah's jaw muscles were constantly tense, and that her hands often formed loose fists when Mitchell was nearby. Jennifer observed that Sarah had started positioning herself where she could see Mitchell at all times, as if she was expecting trouble. The breaking point came during what should have been a normal evening in the barracks. It was a Thursday night, and most of the 317 recruits in the entire company were in the common areas of their respective barracks. Some were writing letters home while others played cards or cleaned their equipment. Sarah was sitting at one of the long tables helping Tommy Wilson understand a difficult section of their field manual. Tommy had been struggling with the academic portions of their training, and Sarah had quietly begun tutoring him and several other recruits who needed extra help with their studies. She was explaining how to read topographical maps when Tommy pointed to a section that confused him. Sarah leaned over the manual and began drawing diagrams on a piece of paper to help him visualize what the symbols meant. Tommy was finally starting to understand when Mitchell appeared beside their table. Mitchell had been in a particularly bad mood all day. During morning exercises, he had failed to complete the rope climbing portion of the obstacle course, and Sergeant Williams had made him repeat it 3 times. During afternoon weapons maintenance, his rifle had been rejected during inspection because of improper cleaning. His pride was damaged, and he was looking for someone to blame for his failures. He stood behind Tommy's chair and looked down at the field manual with obvious contempt. Then he spoke loudly enough for everyone in the common area to hear his words. He said that some people spent so much time playing teacher that they forgot to focus on becoming real soldiers. He said that maybe certain recruits should worry more about keeping up with actual military training, instead of wasting time on recruits who probably did not belong in the army anyway. Sarah looked up from the manual but did not respond. She had learned that Mitchell fed on attention and arguments, so she continued helping Tommy with his map reading skills. This reaction seemed to make Mitchell even more angry. He walked around the table so he was standing directly in front of Sarah and Tommy. Now his voice became even louder and more aggressive. He said that in his opinion, the Army had lowered its standards too much and was accepting people who were not physically or mentally capable of being soldiers. The common area had become quiet, as other recruits stopped their activities to watch what was happening. Sarah could feel the eyes of dozens of people on her, but she kept her attention focused on helping Tommy understand the manual. Mitchell was not finished. He said that when they eventually faced real combat situations, everyone would see who the actual warriors were and who had just been pretending to be soldiers. He said that some people were taking up spots that should have gone to recruits who could actually do the job. This time Sarah did look up. Her dark eyes met Mitchell's with steady calm, and she spoke in a voice that was quiet, but clear enough for everyone to hear. She said that everyone in Alpha Company had earned their place by meeting the same standards and completing the same tests. She said that helping fellow soldiers improve their skills was what real leaders did instead of tearing others down to make themselves feel better. Mitchell's face turned bright red, and his hands clenched into fists. For weeks he had been building toward this moment, and now he felt humiliated in front of everyone. His masculine pride, which had already been damaged by Sarah's superior performance in almost every area of training, could not handle being called out by someone he saw as inferior. He leaned forward and placed both hands on the table so his face was only inches from Sarah's. His voice became a low growl as he told her that she needed to learn some respect for her betters. He said that little girls who thought they could play soldier needed someone to teach them about the real world. Sarah remained seated, but every muscle in her body was ready for action. Years of martial arts training had taught her to recognize the signs of impending violence, and she could see exactly what Mitchell was planning to do. His right hand had moved away from the table, and his weight had shifted to his back foot in preparation for striking. She spoke one more time in the same calm voice. She said that she thought Mitchell was the one who needed to learn respect. Respect for his fellow soldiers, respect for the uniform they all wore, and respect for what they were all trying to accomplish together. The common area was now completely silent. Every recruit in the room was watching the confrontation between the smallest female soldier and the largest male soldier in their company. Everyone could sense that years of tension were about to explode into violence. Mitchell straightened up to his full height and his right hand rose into the air. His intention was clear to everyone watching. He was going to strike Sarah across the face in front of all their fellow soldiers to show her and everyone else who was really in charge. But Sarah had been expecting this exact move for weeks. She was ready. Time seemed to slow down as Mitchell's hand came down toward Sarah's face. In that split second, she could see everything with perfect clarity. She could see the rage in Mitchell's eyes, the shocked faces of the other recruits watching, and the path his hand would take as it moved through the air toward her. Sarah had trained for this moment thousands of times in Master Kim's dojo. She had practiced the exact technique she was about to use on opponents much larger and stronger than Mitchell. What he did not know was that size and strength meant nothing when someone understood leverage, timing, and proper technique. As Mitchell's hand descended, Sarah moved with lightning speed that surprised everyone watching. She caught his wrist with both of her hands just as his palm would have struck her face. Her grip was firm and precise, exactly as she had been taught during years of martial arts training. But catching his hand was only the first part of her defense. Using Mitchell's own forward momentum against him, Sarah stood up smoothly from her chair while maintaining her grip on his wrist. She pivoted on her left foot and stepped to the side, pulling Mitchell off balance as his body continued moving in the direction he had been leaning. Mitchell was strong, but he had never learned how to fight against someone who understood joint manipulation and leverage. Sarah twisted his arm behind his back in one fluid motion that took less than 3 seconds from start to finish. She applied pressure to his elbow joint in a technique called an armbar that she had practiced thousands of times. The crack that echoed through the common area was unmistakably the sound of bone breaking. Mitchell's arm snapped at the elbow with a sound like a dry branch being stepped on. His scream of pain and shock filled the room as he dropped to his knees, his face contorting in agony. Sarah immediately released his arm and stepped back. Her training had taught her to neutralize threats quickly and efficiently, but never to cause unnecessary additional harm. Mitchell was no longer a danger to her or anyone else, so her defensive action was complete. The silence that followed Mitchell's scream was deafening. All 79 members of Alpha Company stared in shock at what had just happened. The biggest and most intimidating recruit in their unit was on the ground, clutching his broken arm and making sounds of pain that no one had ever heard from him before. Sarah stood over Mitchell, completely calm, as if she had just finished a routine training exercise. Her breathing was normal, her hands were steady, and her expression showed no emotion other than alert readiness in case further action was needed. "Someone get the medics," she said quietly, her voice carrying clearly in the silent room. Her words snapped several recruits out of their shock, and they ran toward the door to find medical help. Within minutes, the medical team arrived at the barracks along with Sergeant Williams and 2 other drill sergeants who had heard Mitchell's scream from their office down the hall. The medics immediately began working on Mitchell's arm, which was clearly broken at the elbow joint. As the medics stabilized Mitchell's injury and prepared to transport him to the base hospital, Sergeant Williams began questioning the recruits who had witnessed the incident. One by one, every soldier who had seen what happened told the same story. Mitchell had been harassing Sarah for weeks with increasingly aggressive behavior. He had made threats against other recruits who associated with her. He had attempted to strike her in the face, and she had defended herself using what appeared to be some form of martial arts training. Even some of Mitchell's friends admitted that he had been the clear aggressor in the situation. Tommy Wilson, despite being intimidated by Mitchell's earlier threats, spoke up to describe how Mitchell had been making threatening comments and how Sarah had remained calm until Mitchell tried to hit her. Lisa and Jennifer provided detailed accounts of Mitchell's pattern of harassment over the previous weeks. Other recruits described specific incidents where Mitchell had physically bumped into Sarah or made inappropriate comments about her abilities and her presence in the military. Sergeant Williams took careful notes of every statement. As a drill sergeant with 15 years of experience, he had seen plenty of conflicts between recruits, but nothing quite like this situation. A small female soldier had just broken the arm of the largest male recruit in his company, using what appeared to be professional-level martial arts skills. When the medics finally transported Mitchell to the hospital, his arm was in a temporary splint, and he was still moaning in pain. The medic who had examined him told Sergeant Williams that the break was clean but severe, and would require surgery to repair properly. After Mitchell was gone, Sergeant Williams turned his attention to Sarah. She was still standing exactly where she had been when the incident occurred, and she answered his questions with the same calm demeanor she had shown throughout the confrontation. She explained that she had been studying martial arts since childhood and held black belts in both karate and Brazilian jiu-jitsu. She said that Mitchell had been escalating his harassment for weeks and that she had tried to avoid confrontation until he attempted to strike her. Sergeant Williams asked why she had not reported Mitchell's behavior through proper channels. Sarah replied that she had hoped the situation would resolve itself and that she preferred to handle her own problems when possible. She said she had not wanted to be seen as someone who could not take care of herself. The investigation that followed was thorough, but straightforward. Every witness confirmed that Mitchell had been the aggressor and that Sarah had acted in self-defense. Video cameras in the common area had recorded the entire incident, clearly showing Mitchell attempting to strike Sarah and her defensive response. Within 48 hours, Mitchell was formally charged with assault against a fellow service member. His military career was effectively over, and he would face discharge from the Army as soon as his arm healed sufficiently for him to process out of the service. Sarah, meanwhile, was cleared of any wrongdoing. The investigating officers determined that she had used appropriate force to defend herself and had stopped her defensive action as soon as the threat was neutralized. Her quick thinking and precise technique had actually prevented the situation from becoming much worse. But the real change came in how the other 316 recruits in the entire training company viewed Sarah Martinez. Word of the incident spread throughout Fort Jackson within hours, and Sarah became something of a legend among the soldiers in training. The news of what happened between Sarah Martinez and James Mitchell spread through Fort Jackson like wildfire. By the next morning, every recruit in all 4 training companies knew the story of how the smallest female soldier had broken the arm of the biggest male recruit when he tried to hit her. Sarah found herself in an uncomfortable position. Everywhere she went, other recruits stared at her with mixtures of respect, fear, and curiosity. Some wanted to ask her questions about martial arts, while others seemed nervous about being around someone who could cause that much damage so quickly. During breakfast the morning after the incident, the entire mess hall fell quiet when Sarah walked in with Lisa and Jennifer. Hundreds of recruits watched as she calmly got her food and sat down at her usual table. The silence lasted for several long seconds before normal conversation gradually resumed. Sergeant Williams called Sarah into his office that afternoon for a private conversation. He told her that while her actions had been completely justified, the Army needed soldiers who could solve problems without violence whenever possible. He asked if she would be willing to help other recruits learn basic self-defense techniques. As part of their training, Sarah agreed immediately. She had always believed that knowledge should be shared and that everyone deserved to know how to protect themselves. Over the next few weeks, she began teaching voluntary self-defense classes during evening free time. The classes were popular with both male and female recruits. Sarah taught them basic techniques for escaping from grabs and hold simple strikes that could disable an attacker, and most importantly, how to stay calm and think clearly during dangerous situations. Tommy Wilson was one of her most eager students. The incident with Mitchell had shown him how important it was to be able to defend himself and others. Under Sarah's patient instruction, Tommy learned techniques that gave him confidence he had never felt before. Many of the female recruits also joined her classes. They had all heard stories about problems with harassment in the military, and they wanted to learn skills that could help them handle difficult situations. Sarah taught them that physical techniques were only part of self-defense, and that awareness and assertiveness were equally important. But the most significant change was in the overall atmosphere of Alpha Company. Mitchell's departure had removed a source of tension and intimidation that had been affecting everyone. Recruits who had been quiet and nervous began participating more actively in training exercises. Several soldiers came forward to thank Sarah privately for standing up to Mitchell. They admitted that they had been afraid of him, but had not known how to handle the situation. Some said they had been considering dropping out of training because of the hostile environment Mitchell had created. Sarah learned that Mitchell's behavior had been even worse than she had realized. He had been making threatening comments to male recruits who were smaller or less aggressive. He had been making inappropriate advances toward female recruits when drill sergeants were not around. His removal had made Fort Jackson a safer place for everyone. As the weeks passed, Sarah continued to excel in all areas of her training. Her marksmanship scores remained perfect, her physical fitness test results were in the top 5%, and her leadership abilities were recognized by both drill sergeants and fellow recruits. But she also discovered that her reputation had preceded her to other parts of the base. During joint training exercises with other companies, recruits would point her out and whisper to each other about the incident with Mitchell. Some called her the smallest soldier with the biggest fight. Sarah was not entirely comfortable with the attention, but she understood that her actions had sent an important message. Bullies and predators thrived in environments where people were afraid to stand up to them. By defending herself, she had shown others that size and aggression did not determine who was truly strong. The final weeks of basic training passed quickly. Sarah graduated at the top of her class and received several awards for excellence in different areas of military training. During the graduation ceremony, her parents and grandfather sat in the audience beaming with pride as she received her honors. After graduation, Sarah was selected for military police training based on her leadership abilities, her self-defense skills, and her calm performance under pressure. The incident with Mitchell had actually enhanced her military career by demonstrating exactly the qualities the Army needed in its law enforcement personnel. During her advanced training, Sarah specialized in conflict resolution and violence prevention. She learned techniques for de-escalating dangerous situations and for teaching others how to recognize and avoid potential problems before they became serious threats. 2 years later, Sarah was stationed at Fort Bragg as a military police officer with the rank of sergeant. She had developed a reputation as someone who could handle the most difficult situations with minimal use of force. Her ability to stay calm and think clearly under pressure made her invaluable to her unit. She also continued teaching self-defense classes to other soldiers, both male and female. Her classes were always full because word had spread about her practical, effective teaching methods. Many of her students credited her training with helping them handle dangerous situations in their own careers. Sarah often thought about the night in the barracks when Mitchell had tried to hit her. She never regretted defending herself, but she wondered if things might have turned out differently if someone had intervened earlier in Mitchell's pattern of behavior. This wondering led her to develop programs designed to identify and address bullying and harassment before they escalated to violence. She worked with commanders and drill sergeants to create better reporting systems and to train leaders to recognize warning signs of problematic behavior. The incident that had lasted less than 5 seconds in a barracks common area had changed the lives of hundreds of people. Mitchell had been discharged from the Army and had struggled to find employment with his record. Many of the 317 recruits who had witnessed Sarah's actions had gone on to successful military careers, carrying with them the lesson that courage and skill were more important than size and intimidation. Sarah Martinez had proven that true strength came not from the ability to intimidate others, but from the courage to protect yourself and stand up for what was right. In front of 317 witnesses, she had shown that bullies could be stopped when someone had both the skills and the determination to take action. Her grandfather's medals still sat in a place of honor on her dresser, but now they were joined by her own awards and commendations. She had followed in his footsteps and had created her own legacy of service, honor, and protection of others. The little girl who had once come home from school with a bloody nose had become a soldier who could defend herself and teach others to do the same. Her story became part of Fort Jackson's unofficial history, passed down from one class of recruits to the next as an example of what real strength looked like.